How safe are women in today's world? From walking alone at night to traveling, dating, and even feeling secure in their own homes, risks are everywhere. But there are ways to stay protected. Today on Safe Nation, we sit down with retired LAPD Lieutenant and personal safety expert Jeff Wenninger. With over 30 years of law enforcement experience, Jeff shares real-world strategies to improve women's safety, recognize red flags, and take control of personal security. Whether it's self-defense, home security, or avoiding dangerous situations, this is the conversation every woman needs to hear. Welcome to Safe Nation. Jeff Wenninger, welcome to Safe Nation. It's a pleasure having you.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so retired law enforcement officer, 33 years of experience, Los Angeles Police Department. And now you're in the private sector, founder and CEO of your own consulting firm. So how did you transition after all of those years of law enforcement and decide to go into your own private business, still dealing with safety and security? So how did you make that decision?
Oh, really, it was a pretty easy transition. It was the 33 years that actually prepared me to maximize my potential in retirement and continue to give back to society and try to enhance law enforcement practices to better serve the public.
Okay, perfect. So what about women's safety? How did you carve out enough space to think about women in your business?
Well, listen, it's law enforcement. It's about societies, and it's about having the most effective society. And to take a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, society is measured by how the most vulnerable members are treated. And let's look at our society here in the United States. You're talking about 1 in 4 women are victims of sexual assault or rape during their lifetime. Um, that's quite serious. You're talking about stalking. 1 in 6 are victims of stalking. Um, as well as 51% of women are victims of violent crime other than sexual violent crime. So it's an issue here in the United States, and it's something that needs to be addressed when you're talking about creating a circumstance where the community feels safe, where they live, work, and entertain themselves.
Yeah, so you know how women are always told to be aware of your surroundings. What does that really mean? How do you teach women about situational awareness?
Well, it really goes beyond situational awareness. It really starts with how you're brought up and what you value. Parents really need to make a concerted effort to make sure that the girls in their lives who then grow up to be young ladies and then ultimately young women, um, they have to understand that there's you have an influence on your vulnerabilities. You can control your vulnerability. And it's about modeling as a parent. So I call it like the 3 Ps really. You have your places. Where do you allow your children to go? And that will have an impact on how they use the insight that they have moving forward when they're making those decisions for themselves as independent adults. What's best as far as a place I should go? What is my vulnerability if I choose to do this? The other P is people, the type of people you engage with and hang around. That's very important. And it's it can really have an impact because a lot of violence, sexual assaults, as well as just violence in nature, is domestic in nature, and it involves conscious decisions of who you choose to have relationships with. And it's about what your practices are. What sort of things do you engage in on a daily basis as far as the activities that you want to participate in. And it's those 3 things, and I call them the 3 Ps, that you want to, as a parent, to influence your young child to embody these values and take that into their adult lives so they're making better decisions for themselves to reduce their vulnerability. That's where self-awareness really begins. And it's beyond that where we start talking about being aware of your surroundings. That's a whole separate thing, but it has to start at grassroots from a very young age.
Yeah. And so, talking about surroundings, when you're in your own home, for women who may live alone, for example, what are some practical tips? Let's go beyond, okay, lock your doors. We got that part. But do you have any practical tips for women who live alone?
Well, listen, first and foremost, you want to trust your instincts. Always trust your instincts. It's very easy to ignore them and become complacent, and you don't want to do that. But by and large, you really want to take advantage of what's available to you for your own safety. And when we're talking about home security, there's three levels of home. There's the boundary of the property, there's the exterior of the home, and then there's the interior of the home. And what you really want to make sure that you're doing is you're maximizing your ability to protect yourself through a security system. One that oftentimes you want to have three levels of validation. You want something that you have, which it's a pass key or a key, something that you know, which may be a code, and then something that you are, which is a thumbprint or your eyes. So you have a security system that is unique to you and that you can operate. And the technology is there that you can do things when you're not even at home and be notified as well of things that may be going on at your home. Where if you were to arrive home and someone would be there to accost you or whatever, you would already have information about that. So the technology is actually there. And you want to make sure that the lighting is good throughout the exterior of your home. And you want to, people don't think of this, but the landscaping. Landscaping is huge. You don't want to have windows that have bushes in front of them where people could be lurking and be undetected as they're looking in the windows and perhaps voyeuring and seeing what's going on and potentially trying to determine whether they're going to victimize you or not. So there's all these sorts of things that you need to be aware of, and then have trusted people in the neighborhood that know what your routines are and that they will know if something seems off so they can check on you. And when we talk about routines, it's really important not to have a predictable routine.
I was gonna say, I
Right?
don't know if I need to let everybody know, let the world know what my routines are. So
It's
yeah, touch on.
right. Well, it's important that those that you do know are people that are trusted. I mean, it could be family members. It could be, close friends, that sort of a thing. But as far as your routines, you want to do things differently. You don't want to go jogging at the same time every day. You don't want to be coming home at the same time or even necessarily coming home by the same route every day. You want to have things that are different. And then what you really don't want to do is when with this social media, everybody wants to show that what they're doing in their lives or what new thing they purchased or where they are on vacation. Or we really need to start avoiding that stuff. You
You're
want to
taking the
be,
fun out of it, Jeff. You're taking
I don't
all the
know.
fun out now. We want to show everybody what great places where we're at, the restaurants where we are, and we want to do it real time.
Yeah, but it's really it with that comes a consequence. And you want to be as anonymous as possible. And you look at this, so this isn't necessarily women's, physical safety, but look at these burglaries that have been occurring of all these professional athletes. You had
Mm.
Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce of Kansas City Chiefs. Their homes were broken into when they were away. And the key is you don't want people knowing what you're doing and where you're going to be because you can be victimized, not only physically, but protection is not only of your physical self, it's of your belongings and your ownings, the things you own, your property. So those are all things that you need to consider.
And you know what, too? When I travel, I don't like for people to know when I'm traveling. I'll let you know when I return. So let's talk about traveling for women. That can be a concern. Another thing is like when I travel, if there's a place I want to go, and let's say I can't find friends who are available at that time to go with me, right? So I'm really considering, do I need to do this solo trip? I'm looking at the location, I'm looking at the country, I'm reading stats, I'm considering all of the things. If I do solo travel, for example, how can women reduce the likelihood of becoming a victim when they travel?
Well, the key is researching the place you intend on going. So you have an idea of the vulnerabilities as far as locations and areas to try to avoid. You also want to not bring any attention to yourself. You want to dress casually. You want to dress in a manner where you want to wear sneakers, something you can run in if you needed to. You leave your purse at home. Have your valuables in regards to your identification, your credit cards, any money you have on your person, not in a purse. But most importantly, everybody thinks if they have a cell phone that this is their communication and they're going to be safe. Well, cell phones work from cell towers. And oftentimes, depending on where you're traveling and when you're out of the country, this is oftentimes the case. You won't have cell service for long stretches of area. So what you want to have is a satellite phone because they're controlled off of satellites. So you don't have these blind spots where you have no ability to communicate with anybody. So you can have like a satellite or communicate another type of communication device that is satellite driven. That's also very important. Um, but share your itinerary. If you can't find a friend to go with you, let your friend know what your itinerary is and where you're going to be and check in. So there is somebody that has a baseline level who perhaps if something has gone amiss and you've been confronted with a bad actor, that somebody can bring attention to that.
Okay. So, what about in the dating world? Should I be sharing my whereabouts and itinerary when it comes to going out on a date? What are some of those red flags that I'm looking for that could potentially keep me out of a harmful situation with dating?
Well, obviously, I mean, dating in this day and age is it's very different than when I was younger. You did, these dating apps and things. So it's a very interesting environment in which people are dating, and so you have to make sure when you plan to go somewhere, someone should know where you are going, when you intend on returning, um, and it should be somewhere public, somewhere that you're familiar with. I would suggest take control, handle the narrative, and dictate yourself where the date will take place. And you will always have to have your looking for the red flags because there's the things that you want to avoid. People that tend to have a prevalence for violence or domestic violence. Those types of people that tend to come across with being using fear or intimidation or guilting people into feeling minimized. They're trying to manipulate you by controlling you. And if you get any sense that that's going on, that's somebody really worth avoiding. Because, one question, I mean, in this dating world, I always got to ask, why is this person still available if there's such a, good catch? And someone could say the same about me, I guess, right? So, I
Wait a
mean,
minute now.
it's a
Wait.
legitimate question. But you have to be asking those questions and and again, listen to your instincts. If things don't sound right, they're probably not right. And some
Oh,
red flags should be going off. And it's
okay.
it's just really pay attention to that. Don't be complacent and not heed those senses that you have that something's not quite right.
Should we be paying for background checks on these folks before we, like, when we get to a certain point with them? Should we? Is that a good idea or no?
Well, really, it's not about necessarily a professional background check, but I would encourage anybody before they went on a date with somebody to speak with them at great length on the phone, learn quite a bit about them. And this day and age with internet, you can see how legitimate they actually are. Are they telling you things that aren't adding up in regards to what their career may be, or where they live, or who they may live with, or what their their past relationship history is, whether they're divorced. Now, you can find all that stuff. Most of that is public record. So if it's at your fingertips, for your own safety, use it.
Well, how important is self-defense for women? Should every woman have some level of training?
Well, it's really about when you talk about victimization and you look about the psychology of it, what is a bad actor looking for in a victim? Looking for somebody that appears to lack confidence, appears to have low self-esteem, is kind of unaware of their surroundings, kind of meek. That's something that a bad actor is looking for to find an easy victim. So to the extent that having self-defense training will boost your confidence and give the perception that you're more aware and more confident in your ability to handle yourself, that in and of itself may deter a bad actor. But you can't really rely on that because, truth be told, the amount of time that you would actually have to put into defensive tactics training for it to be able to work in a practical sense is not going to be put into place by the vast majority of people. So it may give you a sense of confidence and ability to care for yourself under certain circumstances, but I wouldn't allow that to be the end all. It's really about being aware, as you said very early on in our conversation, being aware of your surroundings and having insight and self-awareness into how you're potentially being perceived by somebody else. And, people talk about firearms or tasers or, OC spray, that sort of stuff. This is my personal thing. If it can be used against you, don't use it because if you're overpowered, now that's actually something that's working not in your favor. I played ice hockey growing up, and I played at the collegiate level. And I don't know if you've ever been to a youth hockey game, but they have these little air horns that you can hold them in your hand, and they are so loud. They fit in a purse. It fits in the palm of your hand. You have something like that. You draw attention. Bad actors do what they do because of their sense of anonymity. If you can remove that sense of anonymity from somebody, by bringing attention to you in a particular situation in a particular time and space, by blowing an air horn, you're going to scare off the bad actor. And no one should ever be complacent and wait for something to occur. It's all about prevention. It's really about prevention. And if we're checking all the boxes for prevention, more likely than not, you're going to be able to get through life without any significant incidents.
So be careful about whether or not you choose to carry a firearm because you may be overpowered or either some other form of less lethal. That's what you said, right?
Right.
And then when it comes to like defensive tactics or some sort of self-defense class, um, if you have the time, if you want to put the effort into it, then do that. But it's not a bad thing. Certainly not a bad thing, right?
No, it's not a bad thing. And I would encourage, I would
Okay.
absolutely encourage people because there are basic things that you should know. But
Okay.
but like I said, the likelihood that you're going to be able to practice those perishable skills that are going to make you proficient in those defensive tactics measures probably aren't going to occur,
Okay. All
being
right.
realistic.
Now, thinking about situations, relationship situations, sometimes they go bad and people find themselves in a domestic abuse situation. If a woman is in that sort of situation where she's being abused, what are some of the safest ways for her to escape that situation?
Well, really, the first thing that has to occur, it's about three things. First, a woman has to have insight to what domestic violence is, how it's impacting them, and what their options are. They have to feel empowered to be able to leave and hopeful for the future. if you have those three things, then you're more likely than not going to be able to assist that individual to be able to move forward. So it's all about encouraging them to build their social network, um, have them become less dependent, use their support systems that they have in place, whether it's family or friends or people at work, programs that they may have at work, using professional services like counseling. Um, there's all kinds of resources like that. And you got to make sure that they cut off all contact with the person that's mistreating them. And there's all kinds of services that they could be directed to. And in the worst scenarios, they may have to relocate themselves um, and use law enforcement to help in that realm. But when you talk about, say, um, restraining orders and things, they can be helpful, but they also can cause the perpetrator to escalate their behavior, which
How
also,
so? How so?
yeah, it oftentimes can create a circumstance where they are feeling this sense of control because let's be honest, what is domestic violence all about? It's about controlling somebody. And when things begin to occur where the person, the bad actor is trying to control, is starting to impose things that are removing the control from that bad actor, then they're likely to escalate their behavior. I've seen that occur time and time again in my 33-year career, where they've ended tragically with
Is it
murder.
worth it for a woman um, to get one of these protective orders?
Yes, it is, but you also have to apply it to the specific circumstances of the woman at that time. And you have to understand that it's not the end all. No protective order is going to ensure your safety. It just isn't. We have to be realistic of your expectations of what that's going to bring to you. So it's an individual case. And it's one that I would suggest that a woman that's been a victim of domestic violence may not necessarily be in the position to make for herself in any given moment. And that's why it's important to reach out to these resources, National Domestic Violence, Network, or, if it's sexual assault, the National Sexual Assault Network, or whatever it may be. They can get you an advocate who can help advocate for you and help work through this process that is a difficult process. It's a process that involves, not only um, questioning yourself and looking inward at yourself, but a sense of a feeling of guilt and people are very resistant because they're embarrassed of their reputations being damaged because of the going through this type of scenario. They feel that law enforcement is not going to be responsive. Um, it's all these factors that people are having to navigate and deal with from an emotional standpoint to make these decisions, and it's oftentimes difficult on their own to make those decisions. So it's really important to get somebody in your corner, an advocate that can help you through the process and explain these things to you, so you can make the best decisions for yourself in your particular situation.
Let's say that a woman has escaped her situation and she's been referred to a safe house. Are safe houses just a false sense of security, or are they really helpful?
Well, again, it's the circumstances. So that's would be an extreme circumstance because a safe house is a situation where you perhaps can go there and have your location not known to the perpetrator, which in the short term can be an advantage. But that safe houses aren't a long-term solution. So again, you have to be realistic with your expectations of what you're going to be able to obtain from it. In the worst case scenario, you're going to have people that may be leaving a home that they've lived in for years, and they're going to have children that they're going to be having to look after, potentially pets as well. And so it can become overwhelming, especially for a woman that doesn't have the resources in regards to close family in the area. Their family may be living out of state and there may not be anybody that can accommodate them. So there's a lot of different factors that would come into play in determining whether that's a suitable solution for you in the time and place. So it's definitely something to be considered in certain circumstances, and it can be beneficial in certain circumstances, but not necessary in others.
Okay. Let's talk about protecting our most vulnerable populations. So let's take elderly women, for example, with scammers, um, them being victims of that. And then also just criminals doing what criminals do. Elderly could even be physically put in jeopardy at some times. What are some considerations and tips for our elderly women?
Well, really, my tips would not necessarily be to the elderly, but it's to those people that care and love for the elderly. And when you look at what are vulnerabilities in people becoming victims, it's isolation. So I'm speaking to those people that have parents that are elderly and who live alone. It's about creating an environment for them where there's not this great deal of isolation and that you know what's going on in their lives. Whether it's ensuring that they have caregivers that stop by on a regular basis, they're involved in a program. When I was growing up, my mother, she was very involved civically, and we used to go to this one elderly woman's home twice a week, and we'd go visit. And it was just really for my mom to give her company, and they would just talk. And I remember as a young boy seeing that. But those types of programs are worth their weight in gold when it comes to creating a situation where someone's quite isolated, but now you are interacting with them and you can perhaps learn and hear something that they're going to tell you that would raise a red flag that you'd say, well, let's look into that. So it's not only as friends and family, but there's all kinds of programs that people can be involved in that can reduce their vulnerability based on not being quite as isolated as they otherwise would be.
I think about one, maybe, I don't know if we'll call it a vulnerable population, but let's think about teachers in the classroom, female teachers. There's violence more than ever in some of our schools, and teachers find themselves in situations where they are limited as to what they can do. And there are times when they need to protect themselves as well. Any considerations for teachers in the classroom on how they can handle violence or violence or unsafe situation in the classroom?
Well, really, it deals with the policies and procedures of the administration of the school. They need to recognize that teachers are vulnerable in certain circumstances. They need to have their finger on the pulse of who in their school district or in their school are bad actors and are acting out, and have policies and procedures relative to the types of interactions that teachers will have with students, and have them ensured that they're occurring where there's more than one administrator or teacher or adult figure present. And it's you need to reduce your vulnerability by being insightful in that way. Many schools these days have school resource officers. And it's really important when we're talking about school violence. It's a unique issue in the United States. The number of school shootings, it's quite unbelievable, actually. But the reality is 4 out of 5 school shootings, there's at least one person that knows about the shooting occurring prior to it happening. And so it's about relationships, and it's about people interacting and sharing information and bringing in people that may be the mental health practitioners to assist the school district in managing their students. So it's a broader issue than a singular moment in time where a teacher may meet with a student and something violent occurs. It's a bigger, much larger global issue than that. And it involves bringing in as many adult figures that the students interact with and can build these trusted relationships wherein the students feel comfortable coming forward with pertinent information that can prevent any type and all types of school violence from occurring in the first place.
That's good. Well, what should moms and dads do? What should they be teaching their girls about remaining safe?
Listen, I'll tell you, my father was a very insightful man, and I had I had a sister, and my father, he would take her out on dates. And what he did was he modeled what she should expect in regards to treatment from a boy or a young man.
I love that.
And I feel that that is key. Oftentimes, young ladies do not have context in which to perceive what or how they're being treated or what conduct they're being confronted with, and they don't see it for what it actually is. And it's really important that parents make sure that their daughters understand what's appropriate behavior and that there are zero tolerances for certain types of behavior. And it goes once again back to, like I was saying, it starts very early. You want to try to set the example and have influence on the places they go, the people they hang out with, and the what sort of things they participate in, and then hopefully they that will make better judgments for themselves when they become independent and are making these decisions down the road.
Do you have any examples of where a lack of preparation has led to tragedy when it concerns women?
Well, unfortunately, yes. There was one incident where there was a domestic history of domestic violence, and there was a restraining order, and the woman called the police department, and they arrived, and the the estranged husband had left, and the police officers, since there was a restraining order that was on file, they took a violation of restraining order report and they left. Well, this gentleman, he came back and broke in, crawled in through a window, and he stabbed and killed her. Um, and it's so it's like, and then that's not the only incidents that I've seen and been exposed to. Um, and and that ultimately ended up in the death of the suspect because while she was being attacked, she was calling 911. So the officers were returning to the scene, and when they arrived, the suspect was still there, and they got involved in an officer-involved shooting. So not only did you have the female who was dead at the hands of her estranged husband, but you had the husband who was killed by the officers in an officer-involved shooting. So it was tragic all across the board. And then what do you have? You have children that are left behind, and
Right.
that's unbelievably tragic. And because the women that are exposed to these sorts of things, when it comes to that type of domestic violence treatment, they have higher incidence of anxiety and depression and mental health issues. And it's not just a moment in time. It's not an incident that you get over. It's something that has long-lasting implications, not only for yourself, but perhaps the next generation. And that's how significant and important these issues really are.
Example there, what are there any lessons to be learned from that situation?
Well, the lessons to be learned is that you have to take all threats seriously, and law enforcement has to make sure that they're maximizing what they can do in any given time to address these domestic violence concerns and not just put it to chance, where perhaps rather than taking a report, you actively go to look for this person um, because he had threatened violence, and there's nothing to prevent him from coming back. That piece of paper that victim signed as a report is not going to prevent him from coming back. So yes, there's a finite amount of law enforcement resources, but that being said, you have to make sure that you maximize everything that you can do to prevent a tragic incident like this from occurring in the future.
Thing right now takes only one thing away from this conversation, what would that be?
Well, they take, domestic violence and the safety of the women in our society here in the United States is a very, very significant and important issue. And people are to be taken seriously, whether they're reporting domestic violence, sexual assault, or what have you. They need to be taken seriously. They need to understand what is available for them so they can work and process through this very difficult issue that they're going to be confronted with, and then what resources are available to them. And it's really about doing your due diligence and not ignoring the obvious. We can't be complacent as a society, because if we continue to be complacent, we're not going to make progress in reducing these types of incidents.
Right. So, do you have any other resources or training suggestions that a woman who's listening right now could look into?
Well, really it's about technology this day and age. There's so many resources for technology. There's apps now. If you're somewhere and you have to walk home and you're by yourself, that you can find other people that are in similar circumstances, or so you can meet up and walk. Now that, yes, though, you would think, well, that's kind of, you may have a bad actor that's going to take advantage of that. Well, when you have the built-in mechanisms to prevent that from happening, it's a great resource. There's all kinds of apps where there's an app right now where you can get off-duty law enforcement to respond to any particular location that you may need them for. You can hire them on an app on your phone, and they can respond and provide whatever type of service you need. So it's out there. There's things that you can do as like what we call force multipliers to robustly enhance your personal safety, and just to be aware of what those are, whether it's those types of apps or it's home security measures that you can put into place that are technologically advanced. I mean, you have these, you don't ever want to answer your door, open the door, unlock your deadbolt, anything like that. You have the opportunity. You can sit in another room and talk to somebody and watch them on a camera and speak to them through your phone. You don't even have to go to the room that the door is in. You never have to show your face. So take advantage of those things, and you'll find that it'll empower you to have better control of your own personal safety.
Okay. If people want to find out more about your work and what you do, maybe even take advantage of some of your services, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, you can go to lawenforcementconsultants.com. And when you go on there, you can just hit on a link. It says the services provided, and it'll show you everything that my company offers.
Okay. Any final words for our listeners?
No, listen, I tell you, this is a very, very important issue that we spoke about today. And these are some that oftentimes tough conversations to have. I commend you for taking the time and identifying this as something that needs to be spoken about, because we can't be complacent and allow the deficiencies in our society to perpetuate this threat to the safety of the women in our country.
So, thank you for joining us here on Safe Nation. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with our listeners, and we wish you all the best.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.